Any views or opinions expressed in this podcast are strictly the views or opinions of the presenter. Nothing in here is the view of the firms, corporations, financial entities that anybody represents. Nothing expressed here is a view of any regulator or semi-regulatory agency. All content is intended to be educational. Nothing in this episode construes specific investment advice, and if you do require advice, you should seek an appropriate advisor, be that a financial planner or a tax advisor or possibly a lawyer.
Hey, and welcome back to the CE Drive podcast and the CGIB Navigator podcast. This is our second co-branded co-release. This episode will be good for life insurance credits in all jurisdictions except Alberta, where it's only good for one ANS credit. We'll have one financial planning credit from FP Canada, and no IROC or MFDA credits for this one. We're into that group benefits territory, so no securities-related credits. It's a long interview here. I went overtime already in the interview, so we'll just roll right into it. Before I do, the object is my favorite little USB stick. This is Texas Instruments BA2 Plus calculator emulator. So basically it gives me the ability to use this calculator, the BA2 Plus, but to show it to students on the screen. It's pretty nifty. All you have to do to get one is write a textbook telling people to use the Texas Instruments calculator, which is the best of the financial calculators that's widely available. And they'll send you a free calculator emulator. All right. Let's roll into the interview then. This is Dave and I discussing a small town pharmacy practice with a friend of mine who happens to run a small town pharmacy. Thanks so much.
All right, I'm here today with Dave Patriarch again, my I guess co-host now. Dave, we're on our second episode doing this. And Trevor Bills. Trevor is a pharmacist you're actually in Whitecourt, Sangudo, Trevor, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sort of
halfway
between where I am and Grand Prairie, roughly.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I know Trevor from my business coaching group, where he's an awesome contributor to all of our myriad issues. So Trevor, can you give us a little rundown about yourself and your business? Would you mind?
For sure. Great to be here, Jason and Dave. Trevor Bills. I'm a pharmacist and pharmacy owner. I've been a pharmacist since 2010, and shortly thereeafter was fortunate enough to start a pharmacy in 2011 with a business partner. So I've been an owner since that point, and then about 5 years ago added a second store in a little town called Sangudo. So ever since graduation, I've been a pharmacy manager and been an owner for the last 10 or 11 years, and working in small town primarily. A little bit of time in the city and in corporates throughout my university training, and my first couple of years as well were in a corporate store. But that's a little bit about me and where I'm at.
Do you like the small town market better than the big city market?
Well, I grew up in a small town, so for me it feels like home. But I do, and I think there are some differences definitely between the two. Where my pharmacy is right in a medical clinic with the doctors, so that's huge, just to have that collaborative feel. But even in this small town where I was working in Whitecourt prior to opening the store, and you get to know the doctors, you get to know how they prescribe, you get to know them maybe sometimes personally. It's just a tighter community that way when you're in a smaller community.
Because of that, do you end up pushing stuff back and forth? Like, hey, maybe you forgot that the patient's also on these other drugs. How about we try this and that? Like that you might not see so much here.
Yeah. Well, I think what happens is it all happens via, typically fax. In the medical world, right? So when you're in a smaller community, and sometimes you can especially when you're in the medical center like we are, but even in a small town where you have an easier way to contact the physicians, you can just resolve those problems faster. and make sure you're really working collaboratively rather than in silos.
Makes sense. And funny you mentioned the fax thing, because I heard maybe 2 or 3 months ago, the Ontario Ministry of Health is looking to phase out all their faxes by the end of 2023, I think. And so I'm like, okay, well, how big a problem can that be? And I think there's 1,200 that they know of that are being used on a daily basis. I'm like, oh, that is a problem, you know?
Yeah.
So let's dive into some of these questions. What's your ideal client?
Well, I mean, our ideal client is somebody that is interested in their health, that wants to maintain or improve it, and who is curious and interested in, you know, their drug therapy and their health therapy in general. Those are the people that it's really fun to interact with them, and they're going to listen to you, and it's not that they're always going to do exactly what you say, but you know, at least there's some momentum there, and, you know, interest that way, because there's nothing harder than seeing somebody and trying to help somebody, and they're not motivated to maybe help themselves.
Yeah. Interesting how you answered that, because I was kind of half going in my head, what would the city answer be versus a small town answer? Would it be different and everything? And I feel like sometimes at city pharmacies that I've dealt with in the past, it's like, we like the client who doesn't ask any questions and goes away quickly. And that seemed to be kind of praised over stopping and asking a question to better understand a condition or a treatment or whatever. So
yeah,
good.
Yeah.
So Trevor, you're independent, like you've got your 2 shops. Can you talk about independence? And then I know you're part of, I think it's called a pricing group. Is that what it's properly called? Can you chat about that a little bit as well?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, in the pharmacy industry, there's obviously your corporate stores, you know, which would be your Rexalls, Loblaws, so Superstore, that sort of thing. Then there's more the associate program, which is what Shoppers Drug Mart runs. So it's still very corporately driven, corporately controlled, but you have, you know, an individual in that store that's kind of an owner, so to speak. They call them an associate. And then you've got banner programs. So banner programs are where you've got an independent owner, stores, you know, fully independently owned. But then, you know, they're paying a fee to have a banner. So PharmaSave, IDA, Guardian, those would be examples of banner programs. And then, so it kind of gives you the brand recognition, that sort of thing in a banner program. And then you've got what I'm a part of, which is it's actually a co-op, is the way that it's organized, legally arranged, is PharmaChoice. And so PharmaChoice is a group of stores across Canada, about 1,000 or so, and it's a little bit less than a banner, although you can definitely advertise and use the PharmaChoice name and brand, but you don't have to. But it gives you that, you know, buying power of 1,000 stores across Canada, so that you're getting good pricing, and as well as they manage some of the back office type things for you when it comes to making sure you have supply and that sort of thing. And then there are some stores that are fully independent, no banner, no buying group, no anything, and they're buying direct from manufacturer, or through the wholesaler to supply their stores as well. So that's kind of the breakdown of it. So yeah, both of my stores are in the PharmaChoice group, and so it's like a co-op is how it's set up.
So I'm kind of curious, how do you pick that model over, you know, saying, okay, I'm going to become a Shoppers guy or somebody else? Like, I'm not putting anybody down, but you had some choices through that whole model. And I'm sure part of it's got to do with the business model, but part of it's got to do with, you know, what you deliver and how you deliver too, I'm guessing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when you start to compare like a Shoppers to, you know, a more independent store, like I say, Shoppers is very still corporate controlled. They're going to tell you, you know, how to sell things, how much you should be selling, all of that, which is great for somebody that needs that. It provides that structure, provides all of the framework. Whereas when you get into the independent side of things, the reason that I'm there is because I want to be independent. I don't want to have a head office that I answer to. And I like being able to tell my team, you know, hey, if you've got an issue, you've got a concern, or you've got an idea, like head office is right here. Yeah. You're looking at head office. And so you can be more nimble that way. Sometimes you can try things out, not without its stress or things you learn along the way. But I know one story I can give on that is when I was a manager in a corporate store in my first 18 months before starting the one that we did, I wanted to put up a rack with some pamphlets, information pamphlets in it. So I asked for that a few months in. When I left there 18 months later, there was still no rack on the wall because it hadn't been approved, you know. Whereas now, if I want to put a rack on the wall, I go to Staples, I buy one, I put it on the wall. It's done. And that's what I like.
I can relate to that. During COVID, so I just recently moved out of the city, but I had a Shoppers Drug Mart literally a 5-minute walk from my house. And they had the big sign in the window saying, you know, we're doing COVID testing, walk in, or I don't know if it was testing or vaccinations, you know, no appointment needed, just walk in. And you walk in, there's another big sign. If you're here, please proceed to the back, you know, blah, blah, blah. And you get to the back, I go, okay, I'm here for my vaccination. They said, you have to make an appointment. I said, all the way through the whole store, from the front door all the way in, it says you don't. And they said, yeah, corporate sends us that, but we actually have to require it. I go, well, take the signs down then. They go, we're not allowed to. Corporate tells us you have to put the signs up. I'm like, okay, I get it. I mean, I like your model better.
Yeah. And I mean, pharmacy isn't unique to that. I mean, you'll see that in all sorts of other industries, I'm sure, where the corporate says you do this, so you do it, but that's not really how it's working or whatever. So anyway, that's what draws me to the independent side of things, as well as, you know, I just have, you know, the control over, you know, what I buy, when I buy it, how I sell it, all of those kind of things. And there's nobody breathing down my neck other than my own drive. So
that's
right. So do you know anything about the pharmacy business in other provinces? Trevor, I think you've always practiced in Alberta, right? Do you know anything about differences cross province?
Yeah, you know, no, yes and no. Let me say that. Obviously, I haven't practiced in any other provinces. I've only been in Alberta. I mean, I know not so much business model wise, but I do know like practice wise, that there has been in the past more difference than there is even now. Alberta was and still is to an extent ahead of the curve in terms of our services that we are able to provide and the services that we get reimbursed for by the government. Whereas other provinces had lagged behind a little bit. Now I know places like Ontario and BC are catching up for sure, and maybe even at the same stage or ahead in some certain ways. But just a little bit different in terms of what is provided, what can be provided, and then what's reimbursed. But Alberta is still known through, you know, across Canada as probably the number one place you can do the most things. You have the most latitude and flexibility. And you know, when we start talking about benefits plans and things like that, like in Alberta, if I get somebody walks in and they have a drug prescribed to them and that drug isn't covered, I can change that drug independently. I don't have to ask the doctor, although I have to communicate with them, and many times we will work collaboratively, but I don't have to. I can make the change, inform the doctor, hey, this is what I did, this is why I changed it, and I made the change. Whereas in other provinces, that isn't the case.
And just to clarify for the non-pharmacy people, so we're not talking just brand to generic or vice versa.
Right.
You're also other drugs in the same class, treatment class, or whatever it's called.
Or different class, exactly.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So in Alberta, we have, and all of my pharmacists have this, is something called additional prescribing authorization, APA, and what that basically allows the pharmacist to prescribe independently but collaboratively. So you can do it, you take responsibility for it. You still need to work with and inform the team, so the other healthcare providers involved with that patient, any medication other than a narcotic or controlled drug. So somebody comes in and sees me, and if I have the capability, if I have the know-how to say, okay, yeah, we need to give you this drug at this point in time, I can do that.
Does that come up often?
Mostly comes up with what we would consider minor ailments. So urinary tract infections, cold sores, you know, some things like that. But it also allows us to change doses of drugs. Okay. So again, if somebody's on a medication and we're helping to monitor that patient and we go, this isn't enough. We need to increase their dose.
Yeah.
Not in every province can somebody do that. And in Alberta, only if you have an APA, additional prescribing authorization, you can actually change that dose. You can say, okay, no, we're going to bump it from 1 to 2 or whatever the number is. And so it gives us really brings us in as part of that healthcare team, which is I think a huge advantage for patients, especially when we're talking about in rural Alberta, where sometimes it can take 2 or 3 weeks to get into a doctor. We can make that change and say, hey, make an appointment with your doctor in 2 or 3 weeks, but we're going to make the change now.
Yeah.
And then when you see your doctor in 2 or 3 weeks, they can help evaluate whether how that's going for you.
And that actually takes us almost back one question of, is it operations different in the city versus, small town?
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like there's a lot more collaboration. I mean, maybe it's in Alberta versus me, being in Ontario, but it sounds like people are easier to reach, closer to it. And maybe just because of the circumstance and location not being a city, it creates opportunities to be more helpful.
Yeah. Well, I think I would hate to paint a broad stroke brush and say that all communities, are all small communities versus, all larger centers are one way or the other. Because I'm sure, I don't know of any, but that's just because I just don't know of them. But I know that there would be scenarios where pharmacies are working very closely and collaboratively with the doctors in their close vicinity or in their building or whatever, in every major city across Canada, I'm sure. But again, in the rural centers where sometimes it's harder to see the doctor, or you, like I say, these physicians, because they're the only ones you're seeing prescriptions from. We've got 8 doctors in our community, and that's 90% of our prescriptions come from those 8 doctors. So you really get to know how they prescribe and who works in what way and who you can make that change for, and they're going to say, yeah, great change, sounds good, I'll talk to the patient next week. And who might say, gee, I really wanted to talk to that person myself or whatever. So you just get to know those things, and then that allows you to just work within the team to make sure that you're doing the right thing for the patient.
Best outcomes. That's cool.
Mm-hmm.
It is cool. Do you think do patients know about APA?
Yes. Yeah. In Alberta, they do. We'll get a call just on Saturday. I had to work this last Saturday and I got a phone call. Hey, do you have a prescribing pharmacist? Is what they'll say. And some pharmacies, even you might even see that on their, banner or something, hey, prescribing pharmacist, which, for a few reasons, I kind of find that odd that they put that there, but, so they'll phone and they'll say, hey, do you have a prescribing pharmacist? I say, well, I do. What's going on? And, in this scenario on Saturday, it was a regular patient of ours who, starting to have some bladder infection symptoms. And so go through an assessment, figure out what you need to do. And I ended up treating her. And, we'll follow up this week and make sure she's getting better.
So let me ask this question. We're off the list already, which is great. So okay. The way you just said that of prescribing pharmacist, can you prescribe without an original prescription?
Yes.
So for certain conditions, or obviously you're not doing narcotics and stuff, but is it pretty wide open as far as, kid comes in and you go, okay, this is a case for, I was going to say amoxicillin or something, but nobody takes that anymore, but or shouldn't.
Yeah. So the regulations and the laws don't limit us. Oh. We are limited by our own competency.
Yeah.
So if you
own it,
are competent, if you feel you're competent enough to assess and document and make that prescription, then there isn't a limit that way. Sometimes that gets some people into trouble, like every profession, there's people who go too far. They overestimate their own competence. But at this point, we can prescribe, other than narcotics and controlled drugs, we can prescribe for any condition. We have to be careful, of course, as pharmacists on diagnosing. We're trained very well at treating, but not as well at diagnosing. So it's a lot easier for me if a patient has seen a physician or other healthcare provider who has made a diagnosis. Now I know I can treat with this, I can treat with that, I can do, all these different options. And I personally, I'm speaking for me, that I would switch between drugs and whatever when I have a clear diagnosis.
Sure.
Making that diagnosis, on the other hand, not always sure, hey, that's where the physician comes in, and it's, they do their differentials, they do some testing, all of that stuff to say, okay, let's make sure we're diagnosing this correctly.
Do you really not feel that watching 3 or 4 seasons of House would be enough to teach a differential diagnosis by now? I mean,
no, because on House, everybody has sarcoidosis, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
but it's ideally, and I've said this to others before, one day I'd love to get a prescription from a physician that just says patient has high blood pressure or hypertension, treat accordingly.
That'd be pretty
because
cool.
I really see that being their area of expertise, is diagnostics. And not that they wouldn't ever select the treatment, but I think pharmacists can do that many times as well.
Yeah. So almost like you said, and I'm paraphrasing, these are not your words, but you feel almost relieved when you have a diagnosis from the doctor. If you got to prescribe the proper treatment, they should almost be relieved by not having, being stuck in their old ways of, water pills are the answer to everything for high blood pressure or something, That's pretty neat.
So, but I think the big thing, and we're very fortunate in Whitecourt here, where we're in the medical clinic, and we do work collaboratively, and we're constantly learning from each other, like, hey, I'm going to switch it to this because X, Y, Z, or again, kind of referring to some of what we'll talk about in a bit here, the benefits thing. Doctors don't know what's covered.
Yeah.
They don't, so they'll pick Nexium because they like it, but it's not covered by half the plans. So then we have to switch it anyways. Whereas if they just said, patient has, this condition, please treat it.
Yeah.
I can tailor that treatment to that patient's specific drug plan scenario, whether that's cash or government plan or private plan or whatever it is. As a pharmacist, I know, or I can easily find out what's going to be covered for them.
Yeah.
Can I just chime in? I've got a question for Dave about this now, actually.
Oh.
So, Trevor, in our world, we see this with dentists, and dentists get picked on all the time for this in the benefits world, where they will tailor.
Rightly so.
Okay.
Yeah.
They will tailor treatment to what the patient can pay for.
Yeah.
Do you see a risk there? I don't know if you both want to answer that, but is there like a conflict of interest problem there?
The problem I have with dentists is they charge up and work up to the plan, and I find that pharmacists are more supportive of charging down to the patient. Like, maybe that's the wrong way, but okay, so we've had all the stuff with generic allowances and different things that have changed and regulations and stuff, but I find that like everybody advertises in Ontario, at least, if you're a senior over 65, we'll, waive the copay, the $2 and stuff. If a dentist did that, it's fraud and they lose their license. If a pharmacist does it, it's no problem. It's okay. And the ODA says, no, it's in our regulation, not the ODA, the college. And the OPA says, no, we're 100% good with that. Like that's just a business model thing. So, I don't worry about it so much. Like I don't find patients going in saying, hey, I was coming in for, what's the Nexium generic, a paracetamol or something?
Esomeprazole, yeah.
That's it. Easy enough to say. They don't come in for that and you say, hey, you really should be on Nexium. Let's jack up that by a factor of 4. You don't see that. I mean, plans prevent, I think, but so I don't worry about it so much. Yeah. Do you worry about it?
Yeah, I mean, it's good. It's a fair question. And I know, so we talk about it, so you've got a scenario where a pharmacist can be an independent prescriber, and they're maybe the business owner. So now they're going to prescribe and then they're going to sell it to you. So there is a potential for conflict of interest there. Absolutely. And even selecting their medication. Okay, well, which one's going to make me more? And that's where ethics comes into it, to be honest. It's like, you're always going to have these ethical scenarios and ethical dilemmas. When I make a prescription, I have to tell the patient, hey, you can get this filled anywhere. I'll prescribe, because I can prescribe it and it can be filled at XYZ pharmacy. It doesn't matter.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And cool that you share that too.
Yeah, but you have to say, like, and do you want me to fill that for you today? And I mean, 98% of the time, these are patients who are regular customers of ours. So do I say it out loud every single time? Probably not. I'm outing myself a little bit because they come to me for everything. So I'm not, I could say to them, would you like to take the prescription somewhere else? And they're going to say, well, no, I'm going to get it here because This
Yeah.
is where I
What's
get all
wrong?
my
Are you out of stock? Like, what's going
yeah,
on?
yeah, exactly. So,
Yeah.
but there is that ethical
Firing me?
dilemma,
Yeah.
and I've been asked by students before as an owner, right? Because as a staff pharmacist, I mean, it maybe doesn't really matter, right? Like, well, I don't care whether you get this drug filled or this drug filled. It doesn't matter. I'm a staff pharmacist. I get paid by the hour anyway. Whereas, as an owner, there is a vested interest there. And personally, my approach has always been, and what I've told students when I've had them is, look, I just do what's best for the patient. The business is going to look after itself. And I can tell you, after 11 years of doing that, it's still true. And
It will
patients can
always
tell.
be true. I've been
Yeah,
doing it
and
for 25 years in my business. Put the client
yeah,
first. You never have to worry about clients. Yeah.
no, and people can tell, right? People can tell when you're not. But I think, yeah, in terms of billing up to the plan like that, that's interesting, and I can see that being an issue. Now, when it comes to pricing for plans and things, of course, and I'll talk about in Alberta, two things. One, Dave, you brought up waiving copays. So in Alberta, that's considered an inducement,
Oh,
which we are not allowed to do.
oh, good for Alberta. I'm so
So
happy to hear that. Yeah.
Yeah. So in Alberta, basically all the insurance plans have the same clause in their agreements with the pharmacy. So we're talking Alberta Blue Cross, Assure, Express Scripts, Green Shield, all of them. All have in their agreement that basically you have to charge us the same thing you charge everybody else.
Oh.
So when we price a drug, if a drug is $1, I get a dispensing fee. In Alberta, it's $12.15, which is kind of set by Alberta Blue Cross. And I can charge less than that.
Mm.
Or I could charge more than that. Yeah, that's the dispensing fee.
Yeah.
But I can't charge Blue Cross different than what I charge Green Shield, or different than what I charge Express Scripts.
Whereas in
Only
Ontario,
exception to this would be cash paying patients, but most pharmacies just have one pricing scheme and it just goes to everybody. And that's what it is. So,
and we have 3 in Ontario, I think, is how it works. So we have one for provincial pricing, we have one for cash pricing, and we have one for benefit plans. And it tends to be cash pays the highest price, benefit pays the second, and the province pays the lowest generally.
Yeah. Whereas here it's everybody pays the same.
Yeah.
And so if you are charging one insurance more than another, and you get caught doing that, then you'll lose your agreements. They'll claw back money, all that sort of stuff. So
that's probably all your
pricing.
Is that all your successive socialist governments have put in, that kind of unified?
Like exactly, successive socialist governments. Well, we had anyway. Let's not go.
No,
there. Outside the scope, I think here, Dave.
Yeah, there you go. I go there. Yeah.
But anyways, it is so. But pricing wise, yeah, that's how we price it, and everybody pays the same. So, would there be some incentive for me to put somebody on an expensive drug? Maybe. Personally, I've never done that, and I could see, I guess some people could, but it wouldn't be as big an advantage to go to this more expensive drug.
And I was going to say, anything that's a big expensive drug now there's a lot of specialty clinics that are doing it, and specialty pharmacies and stuff, at least out here, that are fulfilling it. So when you get into the biologics and stuff that are low volume, high maintenance to maintain and all that kind of stuff, it's not like you're just walking in saying, boy, I wish I had Enbrel today. Can you give me a shot?
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
So you touched on benefits plans before. Let's go to this batch of questions here.
Yeah.
So, and I think you rightly, like you said, sometimes you sort of act as the liaison with the physician as to what the benefits plan will or will not cover. Do you think that most pharmacists have a solid handle on what benefits plans do cover? I assume that's the case then.
Yeah, I think so. For our provincial plan, which is administered by Alberta Blue Cross, yes, most pharmacists are going to have a very good handle on what's going to be covered and what's not, and sometimes what needs to be tried first before they'll cover the next, other medication, that sort of thing. When it comes to private insurance or group plans from employers, that sort of thing, it's so hard to know. I don't know what's going to be covered till I hit submit and get a response online to say whether something's covered or not. We have a large employer here in our community, so again, you get to know their plan a little bit better. But generally, I don't say anything about whether it's covered or not until I have the response from the insurance to say whether it is or not, other than, like I say, a provincial formulary.
Yeah. And I mean, you see so much variation. I mean, one Sun Life plan can cover one thing and the next employer covers something else totally different.
Yeah.
And we see so many plans with exceptions because it's not really Sun Life. It was an old clerical plan that got converted from,
Yeah.
whatever to somebody. And yeah, it kind of gets messy.
Yeah.
So that kind of like brings us in that whole area of, all these different formularies and prior authorization programs and everything else. I'm kind of feeling like you're in a lucky position, like with having kind of like majority of like, whatever, a handful of doctors or two hands full of doctors referring, and having maybe a few, large employers that, provide a big chunk. So I'm just kind of presuming like 75% of this is you kind of know it before you go too far. Like, I mean,
yeah, although like there's so many different plans and so many different employers, and then plans change, and then some, this list of drugs is covered 100%, this list of drugs is covered 50%. Even my own plan, I have the Chamber of Commerce plan for my staff, and I mean, it's got its own list of things that are covered 100% and things that are not, and all of that. So it's not always simple that way. There is still, and I was trying to find the survey this morning because there was a survey done by our Alberta Pharmacists Association. This is going back a few years, I couldn't find it, about how much time pharmacists estimate they spend on insurance-related items in a day.
Oh, and that's cool.
My memory tells me that the reported amount was like 25% of a pharmacist's day was spent on insurance issues, which is far too much. But I was going by memory on that, so it might be up or down a bit, but it was actually a reasonable amount that hopefully we can limit that. But it's getting better in some ways for sure.
Really? See, okay, sorry, you go, Jason.
Well, I was good. So for you, just thinking of your practice here, Trevor, like, and I think about this in my own experience, is it really front loaded? Like you have a new patient and you're going to put in a ton of time with the insurer, and then, 18 months later, it would be unusual to have to call the insurer. Is it like that? Is it a?
I mean, once we get their insurance working, right? Like, so maybe they don't have a card, maybe they do, that sort of thing. You're trying to find out insurance information. And then it changes, or the patient has a major health change. Now we're on a different class of drugs, and maybe now all of a sudden those class of drugs you have to deal with differently. But generally, once it's set up and you're good to go, it's not too bad. It's when, they're trying to do something different, or the patient is unsure about what's covered or why it's not covered, and that sort of thing. And those are some of the hard questions for pharmacists to answer.
They're
why
hard for all of us.
I can't tell you why it's not covered. It just isn't. I mean, I can tell you why I think it's not covered, but I can't with certainty tell you this is why.
And don't feel bad, because I'm in the same boat all the time. I mean, we sell the plans, we build them and stuff, and then we still, we're kind of limited. I deal mainly in small business, so most of my clients are like 2 to 50 employees. And you basically have a choice of, do you want a managed formulary, a generic formulary, mandatory generic, or brand name open formulary? Like you have half a dozen maybe. As you get bigger, there's more options, but I mean, we can't always give the answer, and sometimes you'll go, that drug was covered before, now it's a prior authorization because there's something new or something's changed or whatever. And it's frustrating. And I know the other thing that we find that gets frustrating for people is we got a lot of working seniors now going past 65. So in Ontario, the Ontario Drug Benefit plan kicks in at age 65 and pays for the seniors drugs, and their first payer. So your private plan might have paid for your brand name drug. Now you're being switched to the generic, and the phone call I get is, how come the insurance company is making me take the generic drug? I'm like, it's not, it's the government. Like, well, we don't want the government messing in our benefit plan. Okay, well, that's a problem, because at the pharmacy level, they pop into first payer status automatically. So
no, for sure.
So speaking on that, then I'm going to maybe skip through because we've kind of bounced around a little bit. But so what do we do that makes life difficult for you? What do we, the insurers and the benefit plans, or what can we do to make things easier for you?
Yeah, I think, And I mean, I know why there's formularies that are built different ways, and it's all, much of it is regards to cost and that sort of thing.
Sure.
But I think honestly, simple is better as from the pharmacy perspective.
Yeah.
You know, if I just know that every drug for that patient is going to be $7 or whatever the amount is. And for patients, sometimes that's easier too. They just know every time I get a prescription, it's going to be X dollars. That's always nice. I think the more information that is available on twofold: one, from the pharmacist to be able to look it up, or B, for the patient to be able to look at it. So now that there's, you know, a few more options like apps and different things like that, where patients are able to go on and look at their plan and different things like that, makes life a little bit easier for sure. And you know, even electronic cards and all that sort of thing is making things easier. I think the more, and this is, I don't know how to do this, but if people could be more educated on their plan.
Yeah.
I mean, and I know everybody's given the 200-page information booklet and nobody reads it. And that's the issue, right? Is there is a lot of information there for somebody to know about their plan, but the more they know, the better. And so then sometimes I'm, you know, put in the place of trying to educate a little bit on a plan that I don't actually really know that well. I just know what plans are like based on my experience. You know, those are some of the things that maybe, you know, the little things that bug you a little bit when you're in the store. It's like, you know, I got to tell this person, well, no, they don't cover it because they only cover it in this scenario. Or, well, no, that medication needs special approval because it can be used for weight loss, but it can also be used for diabetes. So if you're not diabetic, they're not going to cover it for you. You know, that's a common one. And the last thing I would say, not the last thing, but one of the other things I would say is, I wish all insurances would cover smoking cessation products.
You know, that's a big one that the lifestyle category, like, I mean, whatever. And I know why. Like, I mean, I remember 25 years ago when it was all kind of first starting out, and there was a huge fear of the cost, and employers just went, holy crap, if we ever actually have people quitting every 6 months, this is going to bankrupt us. And there was a couple of years of massive, I mean, before Wellbutrin and stuff kind of made it messier with weight loss and smoking cessation. But I mean, claims were through the roof. And at the time we were hitting fertility drugs and that, and hair loss, like Rogaines and stuff like that. And employers came to us, so like, just give me the other side of the coin, going, hold on a minute, our rates are going up at 12 to 15% a year. We can't do this year after year. Like, this stuff doesn't matter. And you go, okay, but if you quit, and but you can quit without this stuff, right? And but I'm with you. And then and there's been a lot of talk about, is it time to go back to looking at those lifestyle drugs? I mean, ED drugs, erectile dysfunction drugs, is a good example. No, it's a mental health thing. It's a physical health thing. It's not just fun, you know, like, and I think that's the way they were classified. So
I mean, and maybe there needs to be some sort of approval processes or whatever, which are also something that drive us crazy sometimes. But you know, the particular one for me though is that smoking cessation one, because I think there's enough data out there now to say that a person that doesn't smoke is more productive at work. They're going to use less inhalers.
100%.
Live long. You know, there's enough data on that particular one.
Claims, like
like,
but
you know,
but there's an interesting one, and this was, I'm going way back 20 years. I doubt if I could ever find this one, but it was really cool, and it basically said the people that made the choice to quit and had to pay for it on their own, the chance of restarting or whatever, relapsing, thank you, was way less if you invested your own money in it versus somebody else's. And I think it got shut down by the insurance companies and drug companies going, shh, don't say that, you know. But I remember reading it at the time going, okay, that kind of makes sense. Like, I mean, do I, like, you know, as a 16-year-old boy went out and bought a car, I got this crappy car that meant everything to me versus my friends who got the BMW from their parents. And, you know, they were crashing it up every chance. Everybody got to drive it, you know, and do you appreciate it or not? So I kind of, I went from the very beginning of this one to where we are now, and I'm with you in that I think it makes sense. But I also kind of had all that lingering stuff still, baggage in my head.
I want us to go back to the education comment here, Trevor. You, like you said, that's what you're looking for, is better education. Dave, I'm going to lean on you here. Who's best in class for education on the benefit side? Do you have somebody you like for this? Like somebody who
the pharmacist who knows the patient.
App.
Oh, so there
Well,
wasn't but there used to be an amazing app or a website called RX Help. No. Sorry, that's a patient choice card.
Yeah.
RX, oh crap. It was a guy who sold the business to Shoppers Drug Mart, and Shoppers Drug Mart shut it down and kept it only for doctors. And it showed every province, what was covered, Air Force, Armed Forces, native plans, everything. So you put in the drug, generic or brand, and it would give you everything, including, interchangeables and the whole thing. It was the most amazing tool ever. And you could actually have a pretty intelligent conversation with somebody. And it was a basic tool. And when Shoppers bought it, I'm like, oh, fantastic. This is going to be out there more. And they said, no, it'll be done before the end of the month. We're taking it down. We don't want to maintain it. There's too much liability. There's, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, loss of a great product.
RxVigilance. That's the other one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But, yeah. And I mean, the thing that's good, those types of things are good. And I've thought about this is, a way to put that information in the pocket of the prescriber, right? So that then they're not, because otherwise you end up with this thing and probably in others, and I know in other scenarios where, for people that aren't in the medical clinic like I am, or people that are in the province where they can't make the change themselves, then it just delays things by a day or 2 or 3 or 10 or whatever the issue is. So, putting that information in the pocket of the prescriber, and that's easy enough maybe for, like a provincial formulary or a First Nations Inuit Health sort of thing. But when you get to employer plans where they're also, cut up different ways, it gets harder to put that information in the pocket of the prescriber.
Yeah, there was a program. It ran in the US for several years and piloted in Canada for a short time. And I'm going back 25 years ago. To give you perspective, it was all on Palm Pilots. And basically they gave the Palm Pilots to physicians in small towns with big employers, so sawmill towns and mining towns, because you could limit, you had 3 or 4 plan designs and pretty much everybody in town was on one of those 3 or 4. And they gave the Palm Pilots to the doctors and said, here, you enter your data to help come up with a diagnosis, and the Palm Pilot would help with the diagnosis. And then it would say, okay, these are the recommended treatments for that. You pick whichever one you want, doctor. And then it checks the plan. It would say, yes, that's covered, or that's covered at 80%, or there's an alternative at 100%, or whatever. And then when you finished, you said, okay, send that to the pharmacy, and it would electronically send the script, and then the pharmacist could fulfill it, and away you went. It just made so much sense because the choices were kind of happening at the beginning. I know in Ontario where they piloted it, the pharmacists fought back like crazy and said, like, you're removing us from the equation. Like, we need to be part of it, which there is merit to that. And they saw that it was going to be a jump over pharmacy to direct, fulfillment or whatever. But to me, that's the best. If you could actually have the physician doing the diagnosing, knowing what's covered, unless it's your perfect world of here's a diagnosis, you do the rest, in which case you get the Palm Pilot and you go, okay, let's take a look at your plan design and see what's covered or not. To me, that's all incredibly doable with technology today. But the one thing you have to remember when it comes to benefit plans and insurance companies, they have legacy mainframe systems that still running on like MS-DOS. So like, it's not unusual to walk in an insurance company and see green screens still to this day. So I think we're kind of leaps apart from where we got to get, and there's too many conflicts between the different pillars to do it well. So I do lean on pharmacists. Like, I mean, you are the one healthcare professional that is, I mean, your time is always limited and important, but you tend to get to know your patients probably better than the doctors do that are not prescribed. Well, yes, prescribing, but you're fulfilling at a more common level and dealing with their other aches and pains that they may not talk about. So I'm kind of hoping on you guys, which I know is not fair, but yeah.
Well, and I mean, and we have our teams, we have our technicians and assistants, and I've got a great assistant who's been with me for 10 years, and she knows the benefits plans better than I do, probably, because she's dealing with it as much as I am, if not more some days. So you do have to make sure it's not just the pharmacist doing that, but your team is helping deal with these issues. And we do get to know our patients well. We're the most accessible healthcare professional. I mean, there's no other healthcare professional that you can find, in a town of 10,000 people, the Whitecourt is, there's 6 pharmacies you can walk into and talk to a pharmacist. Like, just walk in and talk to them. There's no other healthcare professional like that. You can't walk into any doctor's office and talk to the doctor. You can't walk into the dentist and just talk to the dentist. But you can do that with, or a nurse or whatever, but you can do that with your pharmacist. And
It's
that's
even hard in Ontario.
Yeah.
Even like you walk in, there's no pharmacist in that
Right.
pharmacy. They're in
Right.
a supervising pharmacy somewhere else,
Yeah, in Alberta, we can't be open and dispensing medications unless there is a pharmacist on site. But and it's not to say that it's always easy to talk to them, but you more than likely can find a pharmacist to talk to. So anyways, it's one of our greatest benefits, but also one of our things that is hard to, because then you're constantly being dragged into different conversations.
Do you want to pop into patient choice cards and stuff and patient assistance programs? Is that okay?
Yeah, I look forward to this. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's funny. So in Ontario, I used to always kind of counsel my clients and saying, pharmacists have information on the Trillium Drug Program, our provincial high-cost drug program, and they've got these patient assistance and choice cards and patient assistance programs and funding models. They've got all this information. You just have to ask if you haven't kind of done all your homework and stuff. In Ontario, my understanding was every pharmacist kind of had to have the provincial health stuff to hand out. Now it's not an envelope anymore. Now it's all, here's a link or whatever. But is it up to them to do this? Are you finding that you're doing more and more of this? I've had so many weird experiences with, one person goes to one pharmacy and they go, oh yeah, my pharmacist took 5 minutes and explained, this is how it works and this is what's paying here. And here's this copay card and all these other things. And then the next person, I shot this across in the email, their Remicade, it's $18,000 a year. Their 20% should be $3,600, but the pharmacist goes and says, don't worry about it, I'll put it on my card. And the patient thinks the pharmacist is paying for it on their own credit card. And I'm like, no, that's not the case. But I mean, I guess it could be, but they wouldn't do it more than once, no. Yeah. So yeah.
Well, I mean, so in my scenario, so what we're talking about here, a couple different things. Number one would be like high cost drugs, like Humira and Enbrel, all the biologics, right? And so the biologics, they typically have their own support programs and people in place to make sure that people are going to be covered and that sort of thing. So I don't deal too much with that. I'll usually say, talk to your specialist office. They'll direct you to a nurse, and then there's a nurse navigator for that particular drug or whatever. So on that side of things, I mean, we're not really too much involved. It's up to the patient and their nurses, and they'll call us and we'll deal with it. And no big deal. Then there's the things like Rx Helps, which you mentioned, or Innovi is the other, and I've had it happen 2 ways. I've had patients come in with those cards. Now, those are most often patients that are looking for help. Like they're maybe struggling, or they're paying cash for everything and they're trying to find anything. Sometimes, the patient may not have the best understanding, and they'll think that that card is going to pay for some percentage of every drug. And you're like, well, no, it's only this very small list. Growing list, but small list, and then it'll only pay for the brand name, but it's not going to pay for the generic. And so you might be better off to just pay cash for the generic versus get the brand name, because you're going to pay more anyways or whatever. And then we do have a stack of those cards in the pharmacy that when we have somebody who it's just for the brand name medications, right? And because the only ones on there are brand name medications that have gone to a generic. And it's a tool that we can use to help patients have access to those brand names if they require it. So we don't promote them, so to speak. But if a patient has a legitimate need or desire to have a brand name product, then we'll say, well, hey, we've got this card. And the way we usually explain it is we have a card, and we'll just say from the drug manufacturer, because that's easier for people to understand than what is actually happening all behind the scenes. So we'll just say, we have a drug a card from the drug manufacturer, and they'll cover the difference for you between the brand and the generic, and then away we go, and people are happy with that.
Yeah.
So that's more the way that I see it happening in our scenario. And in terms of explaining all of how that works, I mean, we will, but sometimes people are just happy their drugs are covered by right?
Yeah, it's funny. Like sometimes we see people, like, I mean, they're instigating it because they're looking for things, or a clinic or somebody mentioned it along the way. In Ontario, we have lots of advisors. When we did the switch from generic plans to mandatory generic plans, you start to get pushback by employees going, hold on a minute, how come my doctor wrote no substitution, so you should cover it? And like, yeah, but we're not doing that anymore. Well, here's a get out of jail free card, as long as it's around. And so we had a fair amount of pharmacists, advisors pushing the pharmacy assistance cards, the choice cards, the whatever you want to call them, to help people out and stuff. So
and without going into a lot of the detail on the business side of things, but when I say, if a patient has a legitimate need for a brand name, which there many times isn't, because we have very good generic products in Canada. But whatever, sometimes people need them or want them or feel that they need them. That's fine. But, from a business perspective, the generic is a better business thing for me as an owner. I'm not it's more profitable for me to sell a generic than a brand drug.
Really?
And so
that's interesting to me.
So we don't promote the brand, but we will provide it, of course. Again, my philosophy right from the start that I said, I'm going to do what's in the best interest of the patient. I mean, the first thing they're going to get is the generic, and if for some reason they desire the brand name, we can do that if there's a card or a brand card for it. But many times that's not the issue, that it's a generic. It's that the drug itself just isn't the right drug for them. So
interesting. Do you have anything else on that one, Jason, just before we go into the problems that we cause?
Next set of questions here.
The problems we cause. So quite often, and I've had a kind of a year of a lot of this, where the pharmacy, my words, the pharmacy keeps screwing up. And so they use wrong codes. They use a temporary code to override the system, but they've done that for a year now. So the temporary code doesn't work anymore. And you go, why didn't you just call once and get it fixed? So quite often I'll say to people, don't come out of the point of sale, don't come out of the pharmacy and 2 days later try and fix the problem. Like, let's try and fix it at the point of sale. So if there is a coding error, if there is something unusual, then the pharmacist knows for next time, and we avoid that problem. And I quite often will get feedback from the pharmacy, especially if I call them, and they're like, not our problem, man. Like, thanks, but this is your customer's problem. The insurance company is yours, not mine. And you go, yeah, I know, but you've screwed up. Like, we know, because I'm hearing the codes from the other side, and they're like, we tried our best. Like, I mean, I'm not spending any more time with this patient. You go, I get it. So
and it's a hard balance. And of course, in an ideal world, everybody involved there would be very calm and kind and dealing with it with thinking that the other or everybody's viewing it that everybody's just trying to do the right thing and all of that. So that piece of it aside, the individual personality.
So if we were humans and nice.
So the reality is that that's not always the case. I think, and I've had both of those scenarios where I'm okay to deal with it to an extent, but there is times when it's like, this isn't my issue to deal with. Like, your drug plan isn't working. You go talk to your drug plan. And come back to me, and I'll try it again. But it's your plan. It's like when people say, well, why doesn't my drug plan cover it? Well, I don't know. I can't answer that for you. They just don't. It's your plan, not my plan. But I mean, what I get what you're saying, and there's all kinds of issues that can happen. We had a scenario where we inadvertently billed a medication to under a plan to the wrong, like, the plan was inputted in the wrong patient's file. Okay, so that was our mistake. But the computer system let it go through. And like a year later, I got a fax saying, hey, you need to cancel this. And I'm going, why do I need to cancel this? It's been A, it's been a year. B, your system let it go through and let that person get coverage for that. That's that's the insurance's issue, not my pharmacy issue. It was $60. I never canceled it because I said, like, whatever, it's $60. If they take the money away, I don't even care. But it's just so those are the things where, all of those things can compound. So I mean, if the pharmacy is making a mistake, we've got to get that sorted out, putting in codes, these sort of things. Pharmacy dispensing software can sometimes do things almost automatically. And so we need to make sure we're not. A common one would be a patient maybe had an old plan and now they have a new plan, and we bill it through in an order that is such that the automatically puts in a code to say that we're billing this plan as a secondary. Now it thinks it's the secondary plan, where in reality it's actually the primary plan, and then we've got to get that fixed. But the other hard thing there is that I, as the pharmacist, can't make that change. So now I'm talking to my patient saying, you need to phone your insurance and tell them this, because even though I might have messed it up, I can't fix it.
Because they don't want the conflict of shop testing the system and everything. Like
so it's like they have to call in, because they'll just say, well, we need to talk to the plan, the card holder or whatever. So that's it's okay in certain scenarios, but sometimes it's difficult in the moment. And these things always happen at 4:55 when everybody's standing 8 people in line to get their meds.
Wait, you're not open 24/7?
No, we are. Some places
we
aren't.
No, you go with the clinic hours, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, that would be one thing. I mean, I think generally most pharmacies and most pharmacists will step up and help resolve insurance issues for patients to an extent. But there's a limit to it when it's like, look, I've tried the things that I can try. I've called in and they've told me XYZ, and it's still not working on my side. I don't know what's going on. You're going to need to call your
and we've had that. Like I had an interesting case this year that I've never heard before, and the insurance company, which was a Blue Cross out here, Medivy, and they said, oh, the pharmacist is doing it all wrong. They need to do this. So I said, okay, can you have that conversation with the pharmacist, because speak on the same language. I don't want to be the middleman. And so then they came back and said, well, the patient has gone to 2 different, it was Costco pharmacy. So he's gone to 2 different ones. We have to now call the other pharmacist and tell them, because they're doing it wrong too. And I'm like, stop. If 2 pharmacists are doing it wrong, I'm kind of wondering if maybe they're not, like you can't keep pointing the finger. And they ended up coming back going, you're right, we actually coded this entire plan wrong. And here's a problem. I'm like, well, we've now sent the patient back twice to 2 different Costco's to fix it, like one the other. And it's not their problem, it's your problem. And the insurance company's like, yeah, but we don't know that until it fails and we try and fix it and everything else. I'm like, yeah, that's everybody's problem, is you kind of got to piss everybody off so much that you finally find a solution to the whole thing. So very frustrating.
So I think we're going to make this our last scheduled question here, if we can, because I'm going to run out of time here for our listeners. So Dave and I think we both have different versions of this question, but do you run into situations where people have a copay or deductible that they say, like, Trevor, I can't manage that whatever $30 or whatever is outside of what I can manage, and especially maybe today with inflation being what it is, or people feeling a way about inflation. Do you hear this kind of thing?
Yes and no. I mean, primarily, if it's a copay amount, those are typically fairly small. I mean, from what I see,
I went with $30. Like, I'm thinking, it's not going to be on a $7 one. I assume not, but
no. And I mean, on the highest copay that I see is an $18 one. There's one particular employer that has an $18 copay, so every drug is $18, unless it's cheaper than that. And that's what's hard for that, is that there is a lot of medications that are cheaper than that, so they end up paying less, which is good. But typically it's not on the copays amounts. More often it would be for cash paying patients. And so we can help, direct them to supports, provincial supports and that sort of thing. But I don't see it a lot. It does happen for sure. Now, again, we talked at the start of the talk here about the difference between independent and corporate. So when somebody tells me, look, I get paid on the 25th, can I leave this $40 here until the 25th? We have the latitude to do that for people.
Yeah.
And we do regularly. Sometimes it bites you, but more often than not, people will come in and pay the $40 or whatever it is. And always, scenario specific. When I've got a child that needs an antibiotic and I've got a mother standing in front of me that can't afford the $15 antibiotic, like whatever, you just give it to them. And if they come back and pay you, great. If they don't, you write it off. So, those are the things that I like about being an independent, is I have that latitude. You got to keep an eye on it, of course. And I'm not going to say I haven't been stung for a little more than I would have liked to have been stung, but it's just part of what happens.
So do you see it maybe more when there's drug maximums? So like we're seeing now more like the easy out for advisors, rather than doing creative stuff. They just go, okay, we're gonna put $1,000 drug cap in, and once you're over the 1,000, you're on your own. So if you're the diabetic and you're doing your regular insulin and test strips and lancets and or whatever, are you seeing kind of more of that kind of pushed back on you than just the copay side of things, or not as much yet?
Not as much. No, not as much. Not for my scenario, at least. I don't see that a ton. Some examples when there's high cost drugs involved, but again, usually those people are in a different system sort of thing, right? They're talking with the support groups and they know that that's going to happen, and then a different plan is going to kick in and that sort of thing. So we don't see that a lot.
Can I ask one weird little question that I just kind of
last
clicked in my head?
Yours,
last
Dave.
one,
Yep.
just really quick. So how many levels of payers can there be on your system? So like I'll quite often hear that like, oh, it's not uncommon to have 5 or 6, where there's his plan, there's her plan, there's a provincial health care, there's the patient copay card, so there's like 4 or 5 right there. Does that stack get pretty big? Or
I'm sure there might be a limit, but I haven't come to it yet. In our system at least. And typically 3 would be the most that I see, sometimes 4 if you include like a patient copay plan or something like that. So
just curious. Cool. Back to you, Jason. I'm done.
Well, Trevor, any last parting words of wisdom for group benefits advisors out there? You already talked about education a little bit. You've got a captive audience here, as it were. So anything you'd like to see done better from that perspective?
Nothing big and profound, other than 2 things. Number one, like I said before, simple is better from our perspective. When it's simple for the patient to understand, simple for the employer to understand, and simple for the pharmacist to understand how it's going to work. And the second thing would be, there is this prior approval thing that happens in all plans, provincial and private. And there's times when I wish they would give pharmacists a little more latitude to document that differently. So rather than having to fax in a form and wait for a response and review, but rather to say, like, as long as they meet this criteria, then do this, put in this code. Okay, well, I can tell you the patient meets this criteria already. So yes, they do this. Yes, they do this. Here's some supporting documentation. I'm going to keep that in my file. And then if I get audited, I can just send that off to you. And then it's not delaying the patient's care, because that's really what it comes down to with those things, is sometimes we're delaying things by a week or more, and that's not always in the best interest of the patients. Or the pharmacy is saying, well, here's a week of the meds and we'll apply now, and then we get stung at the end because they can't pay or whatever. So I think just giving pharmacists a little bit more input and autonomy that way to say, no, they do meet this criteria you told us they need to meet. Here, I'm going to hit this code, whatever the code is. And it's up to me to keep that documentation, but it'll still be going through at that time. So
I think we're going to see more of that this year. I had a meeting this morning, and one of the things they're talking about was a more standardized prior authorization system amongst carriers. So whether it'll be all provinces, all carriers, all insurers, I don't know, but I think we're gearing towards that. Yeah, and we saw that in Ontario with the SADI program for exceptional access drugs, and they were trying to get it so that 85% were done right on point of sale. The pharmacist could just tick it off and away you went. So there's hope. There's hope.
Good.
Well, Dave, thanks again for doing this. Just awesome. You've got so much wisdom around this stuff that it floors anything I've got. Trevor, you've been just wonderful for answering questions, and being very upfront about your business, and really appreciate that. I know that'll bring a lot of value to the folks listening, and I've learned a lot. So that's always best for me. Thanks so much. Thanks to both of you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Okay, lots there. Really full. I gave it, now I've listened to it 3 times and I learned something new every time. The number here is 6. The number is 6. Thanks very much for listening, and please do join us again in 2 weeks when we will be when I'll be reporting live from the from the Institute of Advanced Financial Planners Symposium. Hi, if you're listening to this episode and you're not already signed up for CE credits, this is a very easy thing to do. Just navigate over to businesscareercollege.com and you're going to sign up here for CE. Just subscribe. Currently, the pricing is $200 a year. We may be introducing monthly pricing at some point, but as of today, we have a cost of $200 a year. And once you're signed up, then you can just go and listen to every episode within your subscriptions. So you'll use once you're logged in, you'll use my subscriptions here, and you'll just go to the latest episode, which you'll scroll down to very near the bottom for. It doesn't matter which episode, you just scroll down and you find the one. So as of the time I'm recording this, the most recent episode is season 4, episode 27. I can just start it right from here. I can do the quiz here. Once I'm done the quiz, then I can get my continuing education certificate. Very straightforward. So I would just launch the course here, and I can watch the episode from here. Now, if you happen to be already listening to it on YouTube or whatever the case is, you can just navigate right into the quiz. You start your quiz, and you're just going to go through the whole thing. And then at the end of it, you'll be able to see your certifications. So we're going to bring up designing small group products. We bring this up and we click on wall certificate, and that's going to give me the CE certificate I need in order to maintain status wherever I happen to need CE credits. So I really do encourage, I know that out of our regular listeners, about 40% of you are listening to the episode for CE credits. That's about 60% who are listening out of general interest or whatever it is. And I really think this is an easy way to get your CE credits. $200 a year, pretty reasonable price. And as you can see from the certificate here, and as you hear me discuss at the beginning of the episode, we have a broad range of approvals for all of our courses. I'd like to thank Joe Tong. Joseph is our editor, both for video and audio content. And Joe does a lot of good work to make sure that these episodes look and sound good, despite my better efforts. I'd like to thank Maria Nguyen. Maria makes sure that the episodes all get approved for CE credits. Veronica Thibert does the quality assurance through that process. And then we have a strong marketing team that makes sure that all of our content gets out there so that people can find us and take advantage of the learning opportunity they might not have known about.